Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for joining, and sorry for a short little delay there. The irony of talking digital innovations using a newish platform and having some issues to kickstart things. But thank you so much to everyone for joining. Take time out of your morning. This is an earlier start, but I think it's a cool concept of doing coffee kind of before the day begins, although I know some folks have already been on calls and doing meetings. So thanks so much for taking time out of your valuable day, especially on a short holiday week. I'm Chris Berry. I'm the president of Ohio X. We're a statewide nonprofit and organization working to help build Ohio into a tech hub. One of the things we do amidst our connecting, promoting, and advocating is bringing together conversations like these with leaders that are doing incredible technology and innovative work from all across Ohio. So you're going to hear from a handful of them today. This is a new platform. Before we begin, it's Run the World, which we've used it to some success for previous events, and it's a little bit different than Zoom. We hope the user experience can be fun. On the right-hand side, you'll see a chat bar. We'd absolutely welcome you to put any comments, questions. If at any point you want to hop into the conversation, please consider kind of raising your hand and asking for the mic, as you'll see on the bottom left. It's kind of a cool thing to do, and we'd absolutely welcome you to join the conversation. Now I'll turn it over to Ben Blanquera, who I'm sure everyone knows, but if you don't, he's Mr. Columbus and Mr. Tech, who's so kind and passionate about the tech community and taking time out of his day, and I'm sure a million other events and programs to moderate this conversation. So Ben, I'll hand it over to you. Thank you so much for joining us and leading this conversation. And I myself am looking forward to listening to it as well.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you to Ohio X for the platform to share these innovations that are happening across Ohio. It is one of my joys in life to be constantly amazed at the innovation that is happening around us. My name is Ben Blanquera. I'm vice president for company called Covail, and we help organizations become more secure and more efficient through AI, machine learning, and our cyber services. Today with me are three luminaries that we're going to talk a little bit about healthcare innovation. In a minute, I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves. And really the context of Coffee with Digital Innovators is really to just talk about different sectors and talk about the fast-changing landscape that is all around us. And so with that, we'll get right to it. Vicki, could you please introduce yourself?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. My name is Vicki Muscarella, and I'm the VP of Product at CoverMyMeds. CoverMyMeds is a healthcare technology company. We were founded in 2008, and we've solved some of healthcare's biggest problems, in particular the prior authorization problem. And we've done it in a way that all of the stakeholders win. So our network is really core to the solution. I lead the specialty offering that we introduced a couple of years ago, and it's an exciting space to jump into. Overall, the organization's mission is really to help patients get the medications they need to live healthy lives. And I'm really excited for the conversation today. So thank you.
Thank you, Vicki. Sudipto, please introduce yourself.
And for anybody who's hovering over my name, I show up as Ben Blanquera, which is my highlight of the day today, because I'll be associated with a cool person like Ben. Hi, I'm Sudipto Srivastava. I am the VP for Digital Solutions at Hospital for Special Surgery based in New York City. This is a space that I've been in a while. Prior to Hospital for Special Surgery, I was leading digital for another health system here in New York City called Mount Sinai. I am based in Columbus, so it's a lot of sort of travel back and forth. And I think I'm, one way to say that is I'm a certified healthcare digital health geek. Love the space, love what's been happening here, been tracking it for a good amount of time. And, within sort of Hospital for Special Surgery, which is a specialty hospital for orthopedic and musculoskeletal care, it was recently ranked number one in the world. It's constantly been ranked number one in the country over the last, dozens of years and so on. So really proud to work for an organization that has, been in the industry for a long time and now has chosen digital as a pillar of its sort of strategic priorities going into 2025 and so on. So, happy to share my thoughts as we get into it.
Thank you, Sudipto. And Jennifer.
All right. Thanks, Ben, for inviting me with these esteemed guests. I'm so happy to be here today. So I'm Jennifer Thomas. I'm Managing Director of Plug and Play Health in the U.S. I manage our U.S. health vertical. And Plug and Play is headquartered in Silicon Valley, but we have an office in Cleveland that we launched in 2018 because Ohio is a center of healthcare. But what we do across the company is we connect the world's best startups with our national and global healthcare partners to help them bring technology and innovation to market faster. And we do this not only in healthcare, but in almost every industry worldwide and globally. But when it comes to healthcare, we're specifically looking at how do we improve the patient experience, how do we improve patient outcomes, and enhance the provider experience as well. So again, innovation platform, meaning that we work with our corporate partners, such as provider systems and pharmaceutical companies and industries, but we connect them with startups that have the innovation and the technology that they're looking for. And so we also run accelerators for the startups. We assist our corporations in scouting, but we're also an investor too, because we have this really incredible insight into what's happening in the various markets. So we have kind of three areas that we work, and I can't wait for this conversation today to really dig into healthcare and the trends we've been seeing.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jennifer. And so on stage today, we've got Sudipto, who represents the provider side of things, Vicki, who represents the health tech company side of things, Jennifer, who represents the innovation in startup kind of world. So we've got a pretty well-rounded group. We don't have a payer in the mix, and that's a whole other conversation that we can get into. But we've got plenty of really interesting content to talk about today. And folks, I would suggest for those online that if a question comes to mind, just throw it in the chat, and we'll see. Because I like to see the flow of traffic and that you're actually paying attention and not sleeping, because I can't see your smiling faces. So with that, let's go ahead and start. Sudipto, through the lens of your org, what do you think are the most significant issues affecting the provider community, the trends?
Yeah, and I know we have 6 hours, so we'll be able to cover all of those things.
Yeah, just with the one or two.
There's just so much happening. I mean, if you just look at trends from sort of last year, even there's a lot going on in, of course, telehealth. You can't finish a whole sentence without sort of mentioning telehealth. There's mental health issues. AI is making a big headway. And especially the maturation of several companies that were chipping away in the healthcare space, like, Olive and CoverMyMeds and so on. But, as you said, to keep me focused, let me pick an area that is sort of close to me, something that I've been working on for sort of several years, is this trend called the digital front door that a lot of the health systems are talking about. It's basically a way of looking at what I'm actually hearing an echo. I don't know if it's me or could we go on mute? My apologies. So the trends that I've been looking at from a digital front door perspective is, we're trying to take all the messiness of a large health system, in terms of how you book an appointment, how you see your lab results, how you get patient education, and so on, simplifying all of that, and presenting it to the patient in a very sort of personalized way. A lot of health systems around the country are jumping into this sort of bandwagon. They're trying to engage the patient a certain way, because if you think about it, traditionally, health systems have been a lot about thinking inside out. It's about you come to us, you fill out our forms, and you meet us when we're ready to meet you. And it's less about understanding what the patient's needs are, understanding what they're going through in their life and the busyness that they have. So call it consumerization of healthcare, whatever it might be, but it's really that absolutely genuine trend that is trying to meet the consumer where they are, the patient where they are. Even the fact that we're using terms like consumer in healthcare is interesting. So would love to sort of dig in more on that.
All right. So Sudipto, what you're suggesting is, as we look at healthcare, the shift is now into a patient-centric view that says, how do we take the patient journey and make it simpler for all its pieces? And I can probably imagine that because of all the different discrete pieces, and everyone wants to own the real estate of owning the customer, that getting everyone to play nicely together so you have a nice digital front doors is a fundamental sort of challenge associated with that.
Absolutely.
All right. Yeah. It's hard. It's hard enough to get a nice SharePoint site for a company. I can't imagine trying to get a one unique front door for a health system with all different practices. So that is, I think, both a opportunity as well as a challenge. But if you can own that, that is pretty significant. Vicki, what are you seeing in your world?
Yeah. So like Sudipto said, all kinds of stuff going on. I think patient as consumer is certainly one that just feels, top of mind. Also prescription decision support, trying to move and help the prescriber, upstream in the decision-making process. And I would say lastly, the trend, towards specialty medication versus retail. Obviously that's near and dear to our hearts at CoverMyMeds, as our focus has been around medications. And I was hoping to dig in on that one a little bit more. I think it ties in very well into what Sudipto was talking about in terms of the digital front door. What we found to really be critical to us as a health technology organization is that technology is important, but really without the network, without people coming back, without the stickiness, without there a reason for them to come back, the technology doesn't really mean much. That isn't the thing necessarily that draws them in without the substance behind it. So kind of the key to really all of our offerings has been making a wholesome network, and that includes really paying attention to all four of the P's, and really we've added a fifth. So, provider, payer, pharmacy, pharma, and now patient being obviously kind of the newer frontier, at least for us. So, so really exciting stuff happening there. In terms of the things that we're focusing on specifically in the specialty space, I think it also goes a little bit to what we were just talking about a second ago. This idea that really what's critical and what's going to make a difference is paying attention and really meeting the patient where they are and understanding, by the way, each patient's journey. I think a great example of that for me is in some situations, it's as simple as the patient getting a prior authorization approved for them to get on a therapy. In other situations, that is just the very first and most simple barrier, and there are, 18 more that need to be overcome. So I think kind of tackling each of those barriers, and some of those start to kind of take us into areas like transportation, even something as simple as, can the patient find their way to the infusion center, to get the therapy that they need. So, these I think are interesting, and that's why I think technology is certainly important, but without the rest of it wrapped around, it's really just tech.
Got it. So Vicki, I'm just sort of going to peel this a little bit more. Does this imply, you had the infusion sort of example? Does this imply that organizations are really starting to sort of segment different patient types and categories and really trying to look at that whole journey? Because you just spoke about transportation, right? Mm-hmm. That's not typically something that you look at for prior auth as a concern. But if a patient can't get their medicine, then your work doesn't mean anything. So it's part of that total patient journey. Because I talked to several of my UX friends, and they're saying that the demand for UX folks and folks who understand the user experience is growing through the roof because of that exact trend. Because looking at it from a service kind of perspective doesn't cut the mustard. You got to look at it from a patient kind of perspective. So that's really fascinating.
Yeah, I agree. And I think just to touch on what you were getting at there with UX, I think UX is becoming much more than how does the screen look in front of me, right? It's really design of the entire patient experience. So yeah, I agree.
That's fascinating. That's fine. Who knew that UX and healthcare would collide at this point so critically? Jennifer, tell us a little bit about the trends you're seeing. And you work with corporations, right? You match startups with corporations. Where's the mashup and where's the investment going in your world?
So the trends we've seen really are from COVID. Really, for everybody, COVID just rocked the landscape and changed how the players had to respond. And so there was this demand for an alternative form of health. How do we do healthcare differently? And that demand became front and center. And so what we saw over the last couple of years is more investors. So the digital startups had been there, like CoverMyMeds. They're working on this stuff. They've been there for a number of years, but just kind of the healthcare systems have been dabbling with the startups when COVID happened and it became so pressing to find new ways to do healthcare. We saw much more investment into digital healthcare solutions. Because of that investment, we've seen the startups become more robust. They have, the right staff. They have sort of run rate to test out their solutions. They've gone and find customers, and now we're really seeing some solutions come to fruition. We've seen that, retail pharmacy, and then the players have shifted as well. Sudipto talked about this, and Vicki referenced it with the 5 Ps. You see the retail pharmacy starting to get into provider space. You see the pharmaceutical companies or pharma really caring much more about the patient journey. You see the providers, as Sudipto said, saying, okay, patient, what can we do for you? Consumer-driven healthcare is now everything. Consumers woke up during COVID and said, hey, I'm empowered to control some of my healthcare. So you see the shift in the landscape of players. We've seen more investment in startups. We've seen startups be able to provide real solutions. And we've just seen a really robust change. And it's really exciting to see sort of what's coming together for the future of healthcare.
Jennifer, I'm curious. Do you have an example of a corporation that said, I need to invest in a startup and some impact as a result of that? Sure.
I can give an example of Pfizer. They're one of our partners. We introduced them to a digital therapeutics company called Sidekick Health. And, they start to explore, and they did a pilot, and then they formed a partnership with Sidekick, in order to, really bring more access to medications. And this type of thing is happening over and over now, where, it doesn't matter if it's pharma or providers or anybody, they're realizing they need different solutions. First of all, the consumers are demanding it, but also, as Sudipto said, the system is demanding it, right? It's not just the consumers. There's a company called LiveChair Health, very consumer driven at this point. It is, it's the concept of taking healthcare into the barbershop. So typically, Black and brown men have been had difficulty accessing healthcare. Bringing that into a place where they know and they trust and they go frequently into the barbershop, the LiveChair, and having some of that healthcare happen right there. And, having, connecting it into the provider. So you're in a safe, trusted space, really encouraging people to take control of their health. And I believe they've partnered with payers. Instead of
that is fascinating. So
yeah.
So that's really fascinating. Just this notion of going to where the patients are and going to providing service at the point that it feels safe for them, so they actually will do it. Is a really interesting trend. Sudipto, I'm curious from you've been in the digital health space for a while. What are some success stories that you're doing that you're seeing at HSS, and what are some of the key successes around that?
Yeah, I think I can speak, of course, for HSS, but also sort of the larger sort of trends that are happening sort of out there. I think the successes really have come in sort of multiple sort of areas. We can talk for 2 hours about the successes that came out of unfortunately sort of COVID, in terms of suddenly the patients are realizing that they can see their doctor and meet them at their convenience in their location without having to sort of, travel and so on. The other successes that I'm seeing are people who really ground it out over the last 6, 7, 8, 10 years. I mean, companies like CoverMyMeds, you've got Olive here in Columbus and so on. It's easy for some of these big tech companies. We've all seen the stories of Amazon, Google, and others sort of trying to jump into this sort of space. But I'm seeing a lot more success with these nimbler, smaller products that have really tried to understand sort of niche problems and try to solve them. What I'm seeing a clear trend of now, and actually it's not sort of my thinking, but I follow this person on Twitter, Chrissy Farr, brilliant lady, and she's now talking about a maturation of this industry where some of these early stage startups are now supporting other startups. There's a company called Zeus that started up that is focusing on creating a platform for the startup, something that was unheard of like 3, 5, 7 years ago. So that's the part where I'm interested. I'm also seeing early successes of the digital front doors. Patients are engaging a lot more, and they're trying to engage with their clinical teams. Learning, taking more control about when they interact with their providers, how much information they provide, and so on. And I always like to look 3, 5 years ahead, and so on. I think the hospitals and the health systems and even payers, for that matter, and pharma are starting to turn the lens away and say, all right, we were very us-centric, let's now become patient-centric. But if you look at it, they all look at it with the same sort of tube or telescope that they have from inside out to the patient, and they're only thinking of the pathway that connects to them. Vicki made a really interesting point about transportation and other things. You would worry about transportation as a hospital if that's transportation to you. Do you really care about what transportation they have when they have to go for their physical therapy or when they have to go to Kroger to get their food and so on? I think still there's a lot of work that needs to be done there. So I'm looking at a better alignment. So really looking at it from a patient perspective to say, let's cover you for all the things and give you control. And they are taking control for all the things that you need to do if you have to go to, say, multiple hospitals, if you have to go to multiple locations. And I think that's the new bubbling trend that I'm seeing, the consolidation, the support between the startups, and now really changing turning the ship around to look at it from a patient perspective. And there's just a ton of companies that are, we've got One Medical, we've got ZocDoc, we've got Olive that I mentioned, and CoverMyMeds that are getting to that state. It's just brilliant.
I'm curious. Sudipto, we could talk hours and hours about this, and the amount of sort of knowledge and information around healthcare innovation can be overwhelming. And I would suggest this for the folks online as well. If you had to go to one thing a day to listen to and learn, where would you go? What's your go-to kind of source? And folks on the line, type in the comments, where's your go-to source for keeping up with industry and healthcare innovation? Vicki, how do you keep yourself up to speed?
Yeah, I think it's a good question, and it's difficult. I feel fortunate. We have some great resources within CoverMyMeds that definitely lend a hand there. So I take advantage of that for sure. As Sudipto said, kind of strategically following certain folks on Twitter, I have found to be useful as well. We were talking a bit ago about getting out into the industry, the various events, and COVID's made that incredibly tough. Kind of they've faded away, and that's been a bit of a bummer for sure. But yeah, I'd say for me, it feels to me like healthcare is mainstream. I feel like often I'm just through my reading of the Wall Street Journal, I'm amazed. I'm finding amazing tidbits coming at me that I'm kind of unexpectedly finding within those sources. So wish I had a better, more pointed source, Ben. Right. Sorry for that.
Oh, no worries. I caught you off guard. I went off script here, so
No problem. No problem at all.
But I thought we've got a lot of folks in here, and there's just so much information, and so I wanted to give folks if there's a one Twitter person or one podcast listen, what is it? Sudipto, what is it?
Well, so I'm gonna. There's so much happening in this space. I would encourage people not to go to a single source because you can get biased just by a single source. I follow a lot of people on Twitter. I listen to a lot of podcasts in this sort of space, both from a policy perspective as well as from a tech perspective. VCs have podcasts, and then I consume a lot of written publications. Substack has a few that people sort of write on, and of course, Wall Street Journal and New York Times every once in a while have some of these news articles. A lot of business folks have started creating podcasts around this topic. And, there's an ex-professor of mine. I didn't take a class with him, but he's famous in this sort of space, Scott Galloway. He publishes a lot about this space. And, he talks about how healthcare is the next sort of frontier to be sort of transformed besides, in addition to education. So I would say, instead of looking at one source, expand that horizon. And if you're curious, I also have my own podcast called Digital Health Unfiltered. That's helpful. And, in a certain way, it kind of forces you to, look out and seek out for what's happening because it's happening at such a fast pace and it's sometimes difficult to, filter away the noise and the signal. So you just have to consume multiple things and find time for that. I miss my kids. I don't know where they are because that's all I do all day long.
How about you, Jennifer? What's your advice to folks? How do you keep up on healthcare innovation?
So I have 3 sources, mostly newsletters. So I really look a lot at MedCity News. It's really on top of the innovation in the healthcare space, digital healthcare space. Becker's Hospital Review is a must read to understand what's going on in hospitals and providers. And I mean, and most of these publications put stuff together in a really easy way to consume it too. So it's great. They just give you the bullets because, as you all said, there's so much happening. And then I read the newsletter Fierce Pharma. And believe me, I'm not reading the whole thing, but those are the 3 that I get every morning. And I scan them to see what's going on. And I'm constantly missing things too. So, like Vicki, we have a portal on Slack where we're all, sort of posting articles as well so we can share it with one another because we're also trying to follow these startups that we invest in to make sure we're on top of, their next good news, next big partnership or next big series, whatever they're raising. So that really helps.
Got it. Sounds like a pretty good habit, Jennifer. I mean, I love sort of the analogy about Wayne Gretzky, right? Why is he so good? Because he goes where the puck's going. That's where it is. And I would think as professionals, a key sort of knowing where the puck is going is actually having some looking up and looking around you and keeping track of what's going on. So great convo. All right, so let's move on. Let's talk about legislative and M&A kind of trends. Sudipto and Vicki. Vicki, are you seeing any M&A kind of trends in your industry? And if so, what are you seeing?
Yeah, definitely. Seeing quite a bit. I think what we have seen, obviously, is some examples, and Sudipto nodded at this a little earlier when he talked about big tech kind of stepping into healthcare. And we've seen obviously even within my own organization. So CoverMyMeds, most recently, we brought 3 of our organizations together under the CoverMyMeds umbrella. So what was Relay Health, Arcs Crossroads, and CoverMyMeds is now CoverMyMeds. So I think, and I think what's driving that kind of consolidation, if you will, at least I can speak specifically to what's been going on internally for us, is certainly the idea that we can do more with the connections that we all have, but I would say also the data that we share and the ease with an easier way, and it certainly still isn't easy by any means, but an easier way to be able to share that data, and really kind of data is king at the end of the day with much of this. And so finding a way to get rid of what is often, when you're integrating with a partner, a stumbling block, something that's got to be overcome in terms of data rights, et cetera. I'm not saying those things go away, but they do become a little easier when you bring the organizations together. So I mean, that's an interesting angle, because I don't think it's probably the one that most people would expect, but I think, at least from my perspective, that's certainly one that we've taken pretty seriously.
Got it. And just to give folks context, CoverMyMeds is part of McKesson. And
yes.
McKesson has united a lot of its digital assets and brands under one roof, under the CoverMyMeds group. And what I just heard, Vicki, as part of that is just part of the driving that is this notion of data fluidity, right?
Yes.
If you're going to focus on the customer journey, then you'll have understanding about that journey throughout its various phases. And by uniting under one brand and having some data fluidity, you can then get real sort of like a 360-degree view of that patient experience in a meaningful kind of way. So that's really interesting. Is I did see that in the research that and we talked about the 5 Ps, that the notion of data fluidity is a pretty significant sort of notion. Standards, sharing, and how do you get so you have the data set so you can do that. So that's pretty. And then I saw, and that's kudos to CoverMyMeds that McKesson said, hey, we're going to roll everything under your brand. So well done, Vicki. And I think that's a big strategic move. So Sudipto, legislation. What are some of the big forces that you might see driving investment and action and change?
Yeah, one thing that I've gotten very bullish on, and thanks to one of my colleagues who works in the emergency department, who's active in the space, who got me excited about this, is the 21st Century Cures Act. For all the geeks out there who know this, kudos. For others, this is a sort of a law that was signed way back in 2016, and it's slowly making its way through the ecosystem. But I am fairly bullish in terms of the transformation it's going to bring. Many of us have PTSD from the meaningful use days when interoperability and other things were talked about. But this seems to be like a real deal, where it is freeing up the data. I'm looking at the comments here. They're just fascinating. You can spend another hour just sort of going through some of these things that are popping up here. But in terms of interoperability, in terms of giving transparency to patients about the prices that they're charged across different, health providers and payer systems. And I went out on a limb earlier on a different forum and made this prediction that 2 to 4 years from now, we will start seeing an ecosystem of companies coming in that'll take a lot of this sort of patient data that is kind of hidden in a lot of these silos with payers, with pharma, with providers, and so on, who kind of feel like this is my data, and they will have the legal provision to sort of pull it out and then be able to transport it and to analyze it a lot more. So I feel that there will be companies that will start taking a lot more control. The 21st Century Cures Act, which I'm learning more and more about sort of, every week, every sort of day, is one area that I'm really bullish on. The other piece of legislation that I hope, gets more traction, Twitter was sort of, going nuts the last few days about telehealth and how it's easier for a doctor to practice outside of the country than practice outside of their state, because of all the state laws that are in place. And telehealth kind of blew that apart, because it said, okay, for COVID, it's an emergency. Doesn't matter if you live in Columbus, but have a doctor who's in Kansas, we can still provide service and coverage. Because there were guardrails around that. And those guardrails were removed as part of an emergency act. But I think it's slowly starting to sort of come back again. And I think that's wrong. I think legislation should be pushed in. It's going through Congress, but I hope that it gets to a stage where, telehealth does not have the same sort of statewide boundaries. From a cost perspective, from an efficiency perspective, from a time management perspective, 6 a.m. in New York is something else in California, and you can provide so much more coverage if you don't have those sort of boundaries. So those are two things that I'm I'm excited about and tracking and hoping more comes out of.
Perfect. Thank you, Sudipto. Jennifer, you deal with large corporations all the time, and I'm curious, are you seeing any trends in their investment portfolios? Are they putting more money in certain areas? Where might they be putting money, those kind of things?
Yeah, I wanted to comment for a minute though on your merger question too, Ben, and then I'll get to that.
Yeah, absolutely.
We've seen a ton of mergers and much more activity in the digital health space than there was previously, and really kind of like mega mergers with this like $18 billion merger of Teladoc and Livongo. And Livongo is a platform that manages chronic conditions like diabetes and heart disease, and Teladoc does telemedicine. And so these two businesses are now complementary. That's a huge merger, almost unheard of. At one point were startups really offering, as Sudipto said, a way for these patients to be engaged in between their visits. And then recently, just a month ago in August, there was a merger between two mental health giants. Now, mental health has really sprung up as one of the most important types of healthcare that we should be paying attention to coming out of this pandemic, because so many people have been affected. And there's Headspace and Ginger, and they merged into a $3 billion company. And sort of in this increasingly competitive space, they wanted to, gain more, more market share. So we're definitely seeing these kind of mergers happening. And then to really answer your question about what the corporations are doing, they're being active as well. We saw Humana invest $100 million in Heal. And Heal is a startup that brings providers in the home. So it's really kind of back to the old ways, bringing the provider to you in the home, because I think many providers have recognized that treating somebody where they're most comfortable and where they can get well is a better idea than hauling them into the hospital and having them be there for long periods of time. So $100 million is a big investment, and we've seen a lot of that where corporations are really starting to take a little more active role in investing in digital health.
And why do you think that is, Jennifer? Do you believe that that companies or boards are saying we got to move faster? So this sort of like incremental things of trying to figure out internally just isn't going to cut it, and we've got to have a portfolio of ways to increase our odds of being successful? Is that what's driving that? Absolutely,
and we could just sort of pop that right back to Vicki. That's a perfect story. Right? I mean, CoverMyMeds came into the market really sort of addressing something that was so challenging, prior authorization, that everybody assumed, well, that's just going to be the hardest thing ever, forever. And they came in and really provided a solution. And McKesson obviously took a look at it and said, wow, we'll never create this on our own. And this is what Plug and Play does. We weren't involved in CoverMyMeds, but they don't have the bandwidth or the capability or the development skill within the company. Yet they know that their industry is moving in that direction. And in order for them to thrive in a completely different environment, they're going to have to look at solutions that are not created in-house. So, the market has changed so much. We see.
Got it. Thank you for that.
We're seeing so much happening in the last 2 years. It's a little bit of frantic movement, I would say.
There is a little bit of frantic movement, and I would think that one could get caught up in that, and that I would think corporations just need to figure out where, start with who are the consumers I'm trying to help the most, and if we start out with that, then everything else will wrap around it. Because as you all said, the challenge is you got to get the 5 Ps all involved, right? It isn't one thing. You've got to get all the 5 Ps involved in sort of this ecosystem, or else it doesn't work for the customer or the patient. And so that is for me, one of the big learnings from this call is I have to get the 5 Ps involved. I have to look at it from a patient kind of perspective and start their experience and segment where I think I can make the biggest difference. That's just fascinating. We got a question.
Ben, can I add one thing to your 5 Ps?
Yeah.
We're also seeing industry get involved too. So we talked about the 5 Ps, but we are seeing industry beyond what you would consider health getting involved.
Okay.
CPG companies, companies that have been tangentially interested or on the cusp of health, really starting to come to us and be very interested in digital health solutions and adding those to their portfolio.
Oh, can you give an example that you're not under NDA to you
Sure,
can share?
Yeah. So Procter & Gamble Ventures just joined us at Plug and Play. And, they are, Procter & Gamble Ventures is kind of a startup studio within P&G to really look at new innovation in sort of consumer good areas where P&G is not, sort of have products. And, they're looking at all kinds of things. I mean, they're more on the self-care as healthcare side, right? But still very interested in being a player in this market to bring new solutions to consumers.
Yeah, and I would think that would play with let's meet the consumers we're at, since P&G has a ton of consumers that is part of their journey. That's pretty interesting. You know what? I'm going to shift to some of the, we got some really smart people in the audience here. So let's just start rolling with some of the questions. I'm going to start pulling it out. Bob Sopko, what do you think of CVS buying Aetna along with now starting an innovation fund? Anyone have a point of view on that one?
Yeah, I do. I think that that's not going to be so unique going forward. I think a lot of these companies that we're talking to are looking at their own innovation funds. They're realizing that, again, they can't grow the new technologies within, and they're going to look around and see what they can invest in so they can find these companies and then ultimately, acquire them or really strike up some kind of major partnership. So I think that's going to be a trend.
Yeah.
$100 million is a big investment. It seems like everything is $100 million.
That's good. I saw that question pop up as well. And I think what's it been now? Almost like 2 years that happened. So, at that time it was equated to like a python eating a large sort of, rat or deer or something, like slowly working through the system. I think they're starting to iron out some of the kinks from that sort of merger. There were a lot of losses they took from a staffing perspective. A lot of their sort of senior leadership sort of moved around. But it looks like now they're starting to find their footing. And I think COVID might have helped them a little bit accelerate that as well, particularly the match of insurance, the testing, and the telehealth components that go with that. So to Jennifer's point, I agree that we'll see the other big ones. I mean, I would equate the Livongo Teladoc merger to be equally sort of big in that sort of scale in terms of someone acquiring something else. Amwell, another telehealth company, is going on a buying spree and buying up sort of companies. So it seems to be a similar logic that large hospital systems used in the past, where they were acquiring more hospitals and becoming bigger because it gives you more negotiating power. So it's kind of like a mad rush to see who gets sort of bigger faster. So I guess that's what fascinates us about sort of this industry and what's going to happen. But the CVS one, I think, it's interesting to see where that'll go 3, 5, 10 years from now, given that they have access to these patients who are coming into their physical space as well. And you can do just so much, similar to what Walmart is doing or what Walgreens is doing and so on. So, who knows?
All retail pharmacy really getting into the provider space. Either they're carving out space within their store, or they're building new retail space or new, space where they can see patients. Every single one of them: Walgreens, Walmart, CVS. So, as I said, the players are shifting, and they are so perfectly poised because there's a CVS on every corner of Main Street in the country. That's their business model. So, and
I think as medication, as we move towards specialty, that's an interesting component of this as well. I think the specialty pharmacies have been playing that kind of role of provider for a long time. So I think it'll be really interesting as things shift to see how the retail presence, how that plays. Are we literally going to be seeing some of those specialty meds, dispensed from the retail? I mean, we're seeing more and more of the mixed models as these drugs come to market.
I've even seen it said that in a trend that specialty meds will be driving the future of pharma because many more people are on them.
Yes.
And they will be the ones coming up with it, finding the creative ways to keep people on these challenging medications.
Yeah, it's very interesting how healthcare is moving to this notion of mass customization, right? You're going to get what you need, where you need it, the right meds in very specific form. It's going to be predictive. It's going to be easy for you. And the question is, how do you the challenge I would think is how do you get the system of engagement for the patient so it's easy? How do you get the infrastructure to collect all data and then share the data? And then here's another topic I'd love to get any thoughts on, the notion of AI and machine learning. Like, what do you do with all this data, and what kind of things are you seeing around, what can you do with this data, and how does that ultimately affect the consumer? Vicki, Sudipto, Jennifer, and any thoughts on AI, machine learning, and data?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I think for me, it consistently goes back to using that data to help determine the next best step for that patient. And, the richness of the data, the completeness, and obviously being able to take that and turn that into, use it all to calculate the right next step. But I think that would be nirvana for everyone if we really could just somehow have this magic pool of data that let us predict the next best step. And I'm thinking specifically in terms of their medication and therapy that way, but it can apply, I think, to any part of healthcare. Obviously, that's a huge, broad overgeneralization, but I think generally taking that and then applying it to whatever problem space you sit within is really.
Yeah, I agree. And Ben, glad that thanks for picking up that thread on data, because tracking our comments, there's a lot of questions just on data, patients being empowered to use their data, and so on. And I feel like, we're just we can have another coffee exchange just on this sort of topic, because there's just so much happening in the space. But the highlights would be that we're just like in step 2 of step 100 in terms of data, because the quality of the data is right now very bad. It's very siloed. People are just now starting to think of data as that asset. So over the next 3, 5, 10 years is when we'll be building that pool of data, with IoT devices capturing a lot of your data, your phone capturing a lot of your data, all of the data starting to sort of come together and being sort of freed. I think that was a comment that someone had here. So right now people are dancing around the edges in terms of looking at radiology reports and finding trends, looking at oncology reports and finding trends and trying to do predictive things. Someone asked about access. We're looking at sort of heat map data as to when patients are coming to our app or our website, what they're really going and seeking out, and then like pulling it sort of forward so that you can say, well, I want to pay my bill. Just God darn it, let me pay my bill, and that's it. That's all I want to do. So, pull that up, or I want to have a telehealth encounter and hide some of the other things in the back. Look at the patient journey from a consumer perspective as to where they're going, what they're seeking out. And then I think, this is where we get excited about partnerships. And I think someone posted something around what Google is sort of doing. It becomes exciting to think about, frameworks like Google taking a lot of this disparate data, how much you're traveling, which grocery store you're going to, what meds did you pick up, and so on, and starting to create a pattern within the right framework of privacy around that. So we're at the early stage of tapping into that data, but I think now cybersecurity and data are things that are becoming part of lingo, and that is why people are starting to focus on that, and there will be a lot more that happens over the next 5, 10, 15 years. So if you have young kids, have them go to data analytics courses and learn about creating algorithms.
We're also seeing AI in drug discovery. A lot of our partners are asking for those solutions. Literally having a digital solution that helps a pharma company understand, sort of create the digital twin of the patient, collect the data, do the study, and then get to the point where they make a go, no-go decision on whether to develop the drug or not. So we're seeing requests for that, which is amazing. We've invested in a company called Vertonomy, and they do things like kind of statistical analysis where they do population-based engineering to treat like the maximum number of patients. They create digital twins. You can better understand a patient. So I think, as Sudipto said, we're at the cusp of just really starting to use and understand data. One of the participants asked what the biggest challenge is of using data. I think that there's challenges on every level. There's challenges on, having the providers understand how they're supposed to use the data, having the patients understand what's being done with the data, and really bringing it to a point where it is useful for all parties, not, just the patient or just the provider or just the pharma company.
Got it. All right. It is 8:57. Just a couple things. There's an opportunity if you all want to stay on for one-to-one interaction, and Chris will walk us through how that works in case you can stay later. But I know that some of us have a hard stop at 9, and so I want to be respectful of that. And so I'm gonna go around the horn here and ask each of our esteemed thought leaders here any advice you might have, or for our audience in terms of how do you win in this game? If you had one piece of advice to your 22-year-old self, what advice would you give your 22-year-old self about how do you win in healthcare innovation?
I mean, picking one is always difficult, just like which Twitter person to follow. But I think I look at the eclectic sort of group of people who are part of our listeners as well. I would sort of go with partnerships. I think we undermine. Healthcare has been a lot about me, and me as a payer, me as a provider, me as an entity that's trying to get business. I think there's an ecosystem that is evolving around partnerships that tapping into that, especially for the smaller players, is probably going to be powerful over the next 5-8 years.
All right, thanks, Vicki. Any thoughts to your 22-year-old self?
Yeah, I unfortunately, I'll probably echo some of what Sudipto said. Maybe that's a good thing. I do think understanding the ecosystem and the stakeholders involved and building a network, and I keep going back to the stickiness thing. I think of, even as we talk about these digital doorways, I think what makes me want to keep going, what makes me want to keep, by the way, a list of 20 or 30 portals that I'm visiting regularly. It's got to be something. And by the way, also, how can we consolidate those so that I'm not having to kind of remember all those places to go to be interactive? So I would say, again, just thinking about that user and what draws them in.
Great. Thank you. Jennifer?
I guess I would go back to the consumer as well and say that this is the opportunity right now for the consumer to drive the conversation of how healthcare is shaped in the future. So, have a voice, use some of those tools, experiment with what's out there. There are digital tools that consumers can use, be curious and keep looking, because when I think the providers, pharma and retail pharma, they're listening to the consumers right now. So it's a great time for consumers to step up and take control.
Got it. Well, thank you. My name is once again Ben Blanquera with Covail. This is Breakfast with Digital Innovators, and I think you got some great innovators. Vicki, Sudipto, and Jennifer, thank you so much for your time. We're going to continue this conversation because it's a lot of fun. I'm going to turn it over to Chris now to walk us through the rest of what options you have. But to our listeners, thank you for joining us and connect with us on LinkedIn. And let's continue the conversation. Chris, back to you.
Thank you, Ben. This was fantastic. And and Jennifer, Sudipto, and Vicki, thanks so much for joining. It is 9. We know people do have to go. You're more than welcome to just simply exit off and head on to your next Zoom or Teams or whatever that looks like. But those that want to stay, we'll do these one-on-one speed networking, which is pretty cool, and it's kind of one of the reasons that we use this platform. So I'm going to launch it, and it's a timed countdown, as you'll see in Experience. And so it's a fun way to meet someone new and then have an opportunity to continue that. So that'll go for a couple rounds. If you'd like to stay, I'll launch it now. Otherwise, have a great day, and thanks so much for joining.
Have a good day, everyone. Take care. Bye now.
Okay.